I wasn't a big soda girl when I was growing up, but I did love root beer. In fact, when I was young, root beer still contained real sassafras. I still love the flavor of sassafras and sarsaparilla and all those wonderful roots. It's a true American drink. Root beer was a formula. I'm sure the native people who lived both on both coasts made it, gathering roots in the spring of the fall and the year. And when the early settlers came, along with their consumption of huge amounts of hard cider, they also made these root beers and they drank them. They're tonics. They're wonderfully nourishing and cleansing, but they often were used for medicine because they help to quote unquote cleanse the blood. What do we mean by that? It's a really kind of nebulous term that herbalists have used for a long time, and it just basically means a mixture of roots and barks, seeds and nuts that are very high in minerals that feed and nourish the blood. And they also have action on the liver. They help with digestion and with movement of food through the system. But the main reason that we're making this what I call my old-fashioned root beer tea is because of flavor. It is a medicine for certain, but it's a wonderful summer drink. It's one of those great drinks on a hot summer day that you can make yourself. So we're going to start with sassafras, and I hope I don't shock anybody with this, because sassafras actually, even though it has a long, long history of being used as a blood cleanser and an alterative, an herb that helps to alter the system for the better. And even though it's a traditional drink that was drank by the native people for we don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of years, and was certainly drank by thousands of early settlers here, in the 1950s our Food and Drug decided that sassafras wasn't safe to drink. And so it actually, you can still buy it. It's still sold, but it's supposedly sold for non-human consumption. If you like this formula, but you don't want to use the sassafras in it, which would be very too bad because the sassafras adds such a great taste and also such a good medicine in there, then you can make this very same recipe without the sassafras. But I'm going to start by adding 3 parts of sassafras. By the way, I want to let you know that I don't just, disregard those studies that are done on the toxicity of plants. Some of them I pay close attention to. But when I looked at the traditional studies or the traditional uses of sassafras, and then I look at the modern research and what was done, in my mind, it's a really safe herb to use because the studies were done actually in the lab in a petri dish, not on human beings at all. And it wasn't done with the whole plant, which is what we're using, the whole plant. It was done by the single isolate, the saffrol, which by itself extracted from the sassafras and injected into laboratory rats, caused carcinogenic cells. I think you could inject anything into rats in laboratories and probably have something bad grow. But when we boil sassafras, when we simmer it and cook it, the saffrol is hardly water soluble. You get minute amounts of it. And it was interesting, when those studies were done in the 1950s on sassafras, the lowest rate of throat cancer in the country was in the area where people drank sassafras as a regular food. And by the way, it's as a regular drink. And by the way, it's still drank in the whole southeastern part of the United States as a really good medicine and as a good herb. So it's native to the northeastern the southeastern parts of the United States, and it grows as far north as Massachusetts. We're a little too far north for it up here. So there's the sassafras. It was a main ingredient in the root beer that I drank as a child, but in the 1950s, our government took it out of our drinks and they allowed the companies to use synthetic sassafras, which I'm sure is really good for us. I'll take the herb any day. The other herb that I'm going to add is another traditional herb that's used is sarsaparilla. This particular sarsaparilla is a Jamaican sarsaparilla, which is considered one of the most medicinal sarsaparillas. And like sassafras, it's also another blood tonic, another herb that is used for the liver. And it's also used a lot in formulas for men to enhance vitality and as an herb that's really good for the hormonal system of both men and women, but in particular it was used for men. But the sarsaparilla that I really love and the sarsaparilla that was used in all of the early root beer formulas was our native sarsaparilla, which grows prolifically in the Northeast, both the northeastern part of the United States and the southeastern United States. It's a member of the Aurelia family, the same family as ginseng, and it actually has a lot of those same properties. The difference being is that it's very, very prolific. So we're going to add an equal amount of the sarsaparilla. I can tell you in those early formulas that the pioneers and the native people did, they didn't use the Jamaican, they used the native sarsaparilla. And it's very underused, our native sarsaparilla. I don't know why, but not very many people are using it. I feel it's going to be one of those soon to be rediscovered herbs. So we're going to use equal parts of the sassafras and sarsaparilla, and then we're going to add a birch bark, Birch bark was also another major ingredient in the old formulas of root beer. It's not a root for sure, it's the bark. And it has a wonderful, delicious kind of wintergreen-like flavor to it, and that it's the inner bark. Again, it's native to the northeastern and southeastern parts of the United States, and it also has blood purifying properties. It's officially classified as an alterative, and I'm going to use, I just put in 2 parts, but our recipe calls for 1 part. So we're going to put a little of that in. And then the rest of the formula, I just kind of use the herbs I have on hand in this particular formula because I want to make a tea that's not only really, really tasty and has that old classic root beer flavor, but I also want to use herbs that are really good for my liver, that help energy move and help with digestion. So I'm going to use dandelion, and we're going to use the root in this formula. The root and leaf of the dandelion are both used medicinally, but they're used actually, they have different properties. And we're going to use just 1 part. The part I'm using, by the way, is my tablespoon here, so because I don't want to make a huge amount, just enough for a nice pot. So we're going to add the dandelion, and we're also going to add a bit of licorice root. Licorice because it adds that wonderful licorice-like flavor, and it goes along really well with the sarsaparilla and the sassafras. Not everybody loves licorice. I'm a huge fan of licorice. In fact, licorice candy is like my favorite candy in the world. Good licorice, real licorice, that's made with real licorice extract. I love the flavor, but it's an interesting herb because there's some people that just actually have an adverse reaction taste-wise to it. It's used a lot in formulas for women's health because it's one of those herbs that helps with the adrenal glands. It's really excellent for the endocrine gland system, and it also helps with hormonal balance as well. But there's some women who really just don't want to taste that plant, so you always want to ask. We're going to also add a little bit of fennel. Fennel also adds that licorice flavor. If you don't like the taste, of licorice, if you have an adverse feeling to that, then you can add a little bit of fennel, though it will give it that licorice flavor. But for some reason, people who don't like the taste of licorice do fine with the taste of fennel. So we're going to add fennel. The medicinal uses of fennel are it's really good for digestion. It's one of the primary herbs actually used for expelling gas. That just lets us know people have always had gas when they digest, so do animals. And that there's a whole group of herbs that are called carmimatives, and their classic action in the body is to expel gas, which they actually do. They expel it. So you actually you sound a little more gassy, but the gas at least is outside and not inside, for better or worse. And then I love these Chinese star anises. These are definitely not local. They come from China. They possibly can be grown, but I don't know anybody who is growing them locally. But they're just beautiful. They're almost like little magical stars, and they have a very anise-like flavor, very much like the fennel. And I really just add them. I mean, you don't really need to add them other than they add so much beauty. Like just putting those chunky little pieces in, I think looks so nice. And then I add a little bit of ginger, and we'll say about a 1/4 part of ginger. This is a teaspoon. I love the flavor of ginger, but it can be very hot and overpowering. And here in this formula, I want it just to kind of be a secondary flavor. So that's the basic formula. Oh, we have to add burdock too. This is a really good medicinal formula that's not only tastes good, but we can actually recommend this to people who are having liver difficulties. How do we recognize liver difficulties? Well, you can have liver problems that work through your skin, poor elimination. You can have, as I said, problem skin, and problem with the hormones too are often traced back to the liver. It's such a major, important organ to the physiological workings of our body. So what we're doing here is we're blending this fabulous tea that's going to taste so good that you can serve it to people just as a wonderful, refreshing blend, but also has these very good properties, good medicinal properties. We could call this tea finished now, the basic formula, but I always like to add a little bit of stevia. Stevia is a natural sweetener. It actually has over 50 times more sweetness in it than sugar does, but it has no calories. It's absolutely not going to cause any problems with your teeth. There's no problems with teeth, no calories, and it's also an herb, even though it is very sweet, it doesn't digest like regular glucose or sugar, and it's actually really good for the pancreas and for people who have diabetes and other problems with blood sugar. This is a sweetener that's recommended. You often find it now in stores as a white powder. I always am a little bit mindful and concerned about white powders. A white powder means, well, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean something to be deadly afraid of, actually. But usually it means something that's extremely purified. And so I really like using it in the powder form. This is just powdered leaf, or even just the whole leaf. It's very easy to grow stevia. It's an annual here, and we grow it in pots. And then usually just 1 or 2 plants gives me enough stevia for the whole year. I dry it in the end of the year. But during the season, you can just add the fresh stevia. The one problem with stevia, because it is so sweet, remember it's at least 50 times sweeter than sugar, you have to be very careful of how much you add to a formula. In this formula, because it's dry herbs, I usually say just add a pinch, or it's about 5% of the entire formula. So we're going to add just a small amount. If you add too much stevia, it becomes cloyingly sweet, too sweet, and people don't like that flavor. You just want it to, again, come up like the ginger, to come up behind you, so you're not really sure what that sweet taste is, but it's in there and it's delicious. So that's our blend. With roots, what I like to do is I like to simmer them, because roots are, well, they're a little bit like a rooty vegetable. You can steam them if you chop them up really finely, but if you low simmer, which is like a low boil, you break down all those cell walls and you bring out all the deep constituents that are in the root. Some people like to just put the herb in a quart jar, this is a half gallon, but say in a jar, and cover it with boiling water and let it sit overnight. And that works as well. But again, a lot of it is who you study with. There's no right or wrong way. It's what works for you. In fact, I grew up being taught by my teachers to keep the lid on the pot when you're cooking, not to let any of that steam evaporate unless you're trying to do a reduction, like unless you were trying to make a syrup. But one time, one of my very favorite herbalists, a credible clinician and a great character, Phyllis Light, actually her name is Phyllis Delight, and she's delightful. She came up here, she's from the South. She lives in Arkansas, and she's like 3rd or 4th generation herbalist in her family. She's a community herbalist. And she came up here, she was teaching my advanced students, and she brought with her this great big sassafras root. Sassafras is a medicine down there. They use it all the time. They don't pay any attention to those rulings that say that saffron is toxic, especially when you can't even get it out in water. That's sort of a silly thing, isn't it? And so she was going to make a great big pot of this sassafras, and she had it boiling, big pot, because it was a big root. She had it boiling on the stove, and I went over and I said, "Oh, Phyllis, let's cover the pot up. Don't you want to cover it?" And she looked at me, "We never cover these pots." And so, she was boiling it away. And I wasn't going to either argue with her or try to teach her, because this is an herbalist who absolutely knows what she's doing. And she makes really this incredible sassafras, just boiling it away. So what's the point of that story, really? It's just to show you that, again, over and over and over again, this is an art. We don't want to see it standardized in such a way that there's one way to do it. In fact, one of the great things I love about this art is that everybody who practices herbalism is a real character. And in fact, I would say in all the years that I've practiced herbalism, I've heard opinions about everything, which I always find so interesting, because I have my own, of course. And probably the only thing that every herbalist that I know absolutely agrees on is don't use aluminum pots and pans. Everything else is open for discussion. And really, for you who are just starting your herbal work, that can be confusing, but I might say it's a lesson about life. It's how life is. It's not like standardized. Life is a lesson, and it's learning. And more than anything, it's learning to trust that inherent wisdom in ourselves. So, I'm going to cook this with the lid on, and Phyllis is going to cook it with the lid off, and we're both going to end up with a really fabulous brew. So we're going to simmer it for at least, with roots, I like to simmer them for about a half an hour, sometimes 45 minutes. Simmering here is a low boil. It's not a really rapid boil. One of the things I find really interesting with sassafras, and you might have noticed this too, sassafras is high in saponins. Saponins have a cleansing action in the body. And plants that are really concentrated in saponins could also, if they're super concentrated in saponins, can also be toxic. So sassafras doesn't have that many saponins in it, but when you boil sassafras, you'll notice sometimes that it boils over really quickly. And I wondered why that was, why it was that, I could leave other plants on the stove, other herbs, and they wouldn't just boil over. But sassafras, if I forgot to watch it for 10 minutes, it would start to boil over. And that's really the saponins in the sassafras. When they get activated by that hot water, they start bubbling, and they bubble more. So just a little a little lesson in the chemical constituents. So let's boil that and get it going so we can have our root beer tonic. So I think that's been boiling sufficiently length of time. Smells delicious. We're going to strain it. The strainer that I like the best are these stainless, they're double stainless steel strainers. They just get all the particulates out of it. So we're going to strain that. It's nice, root beery brown. Perfect. And we just plop. There you go. And I'm one of those people, I just like to do little tastes as I go along. That stevia was just perfect, that little bit of stevia. And then we're going to turn this. You could drink it this way. You can have it a nice hot drink if you want. But we're going to put this in. We're going to make root beer seltzer, like a real sparkling root beer. And so we're going to put that in. You saw how nicely that double stainless steel strain, there was very little particulates left in there. And then what I do, I add about, not quite, the same amount, maybe half the amount of a sparkling water, a seltzer water. Usually I just get plain sparkling water, but I couldn't find it at my co-op yesterday. And they had this old New England seltzer, which is just sparkling water with a little bit of natural orange juice or orange flavoring. So I thought we'd try that and see, because actually orange is a good flavor to put in here. So this is a bit of an experiment. I absolutely know with the just natural seltzer that it turns out so good and delicious. So we're just going to put that in. About that amount, and we're going to do a little taste. And here's a nice cup here. And we're going to just make sure that it's perfect. Oh my God, it's so good. And it's especially good with that little natural orange flavoring. I thought it might be. I'm going to add a little bit more because I want it to be, this is very concentrated, and I want it to be kind of a light summer drink. We could serve it over ice with some little lemon slices in it. This is organic lemon. It's important when you use lemon and orange, especially with the peel, that they be organic, especially with the citrus, because these peels will hold all of those chemicals. So let's give it a good shake. Look at that. Doesn't that just look like root beer? Well, I'll tell you, it's the best root beer you're going to buy these days. You're just not going to buy stuff like that's as good and natural and good for you as this. Hey, John, come on over here and try some.
Would love to. Myself in shot.
Here he is, the cameraman.
It's amazing. It's actually better than any root beer you can get in the store, even those new fancy ones that are like $3 a bottle.
Well, they're too sweet. They
Yeah.
make those too sweet, yeah.
Right, it's not too sweet. I love the stevia in there and the seltzer. It's actually really nice.
Isn't that great? Yeah, I love it.
Oh, it's amazing.
I know, and
The more you drink it, the more it's...
you study the medicinal
Y'all back
uses.
there can have it. But you can have some. You can go make some.
It's good, isn't it? Will you like to try some? Another good teaching about the herbs in here is when you understand even just a little bit of the chemistry of plants. You don't have to be a chemist to understand it, but because your mouth, your body will tell you. But sassafras is very astringent. And so if you drink a lot of astringent herbs, it actually is drying. Sometimes people go, well, I drink all this green tea, or I drink all this black tea, or I drink all this herbal tea. And if it's an astringent drying herb, it actually isn't moisturizing your body at all. It's drying, which if you understand those properties is good for you. That's a good thing. But if you don't, and you aren't paying attention to that taste and what it's doing to you, it can actually be drying and dry you out. I got to have some too. This stuff is way too good.
It smells delicious.
Yeah, it's good. So, root beer party!
Cheers.
Well, we need a root beer toast. Bula bula, let's see.
For those of you who have not watched the Kava video, that'll make sense.
Oh, that's good. I think I'm going to use that orange seltzer water all the time.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that delicious?